we're going to have a panel discussion here. I should tell you the origin of this panel, because it was put together very quickly. Okay. The original event that was scheduled for this time slot at this conference was a formal debate on the proposition proposed, okay, the deep space gateway has merit, okay, and because, see, I believe that there's too many projects that get started in NASA without any proper debate on the subject. And they just become accepted because a certain constellation of bureaucratic powers say, this is it, we're doing it, and they do not admit any further debate. I would argue that both the space station and shuttle fall into this category. Certainly the asteroid redirect mission fell into this category. Now, we performed a useful function because we did actually have a debate, and they did show up on the asteroid redirect mission at our conference in Washington, D.C. last year. And I do have to give the proponents credit that they were willing to show up and defend the merit of their proposal, although I disagree that it had merit. However, we have a whole bunch of people going around right now from the NASA Office of Human Spaceflight, from the business development offices of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and the United Launch Alliance, saying that as a necessary step to sending people to Mars, we must have a space station in orbit around the moon. And it's impossible for me to see why it's necessary, especially in view of the fact that no one who previously ever put together a plan to get to Mars, including the Wernher von Braun plan of 1969, the 90-day report of 1989, which was quite liberal in its proposal of things to do before you went to Mars, my own Mars Direct plan, the various design reference missions, the synthesis group report, the Griffin plan, or even the Bolden plan of 1 year earlier, ever included a space station in orbit around the moon as is necessary to go to Mars, and nor is it necessary to go to the moon. So anyway, so I put this forth. I said, let's have a debate, formal debate. Let's reason it out. And no one would agree to defend the affirmative. So the nation right now is being asked to spend tens of billions of dollars and a decade of effort of its human spaceflight program on a project that no one is willing to defend in public. Therefore, I mean, unless, and then I also put it out on Facebook and Twitter. Is anyone willing to defend this idea? Okay, and you are? I will. Okay, you will? Are you an aerospace professional?
I have a small aerospace company that's getting bigger by the day.
Okay, what's your name, sir?
Davidson.
Would you like to come up and be on this panel? Sure. Okay. But what we're... Okay. Brave man. Okay, so, but what we're going to do in this panel, okay, which... Okay.
You know me, Bob.
Well, I can't see that far anymore. Okay. All right. What we're rather going to do here than have a formal debate with proposals and rebuttals is we're just going to have a panel discussion on what should be the next step for the human spaceflight program, and Greg is welcome to argue that the next step should be a space station in lunar orbit. And other people will present their ideas. Okay. I guess, since I've already spoken a little bit, why don't we start? Rick, would you like to give your idea?
No. Go ahead and start down there.
Oh.
Fine. Go ahead, Carol. Ladies first.
All right. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to kick it off?
Why don't you kick it off?
All right. Okay.
Or Bob.
Okay. So I do not think it should be a space station in lunar orbit. I do not believe that if any manager were asked, we want you to get humans to Mars in the shortest amount of time at the most reasonable budget, that they would put a space station in lunar orbit in their plan, nor would they have put a 500-ton rock in lunar orbit in their plan. Okay, it just isn't part of the plan. I do not believe that if anyone was charged with building a lunar base, that they would put a 500-ton rock in lunar orbit or put a space station in lunar orbit. The right way to build a lunar base, in particular, actually, is to build a lunar base. And in particular, because we now know that there are ice deposits in the lunar poles, okay, so that you can readily make propellant on the surface of the moon, you do not want to use lunar orbit rendezvous in your plan for a lunar base, because it's much more mass effective to come back directly from the surface of the moon with propellant made on the moon. And furthermore, if you make propellant on the moon, you can have a base in one location and use it to fuel ballistic hoppers that can go from there to various locations at great distances around the moon and explore all sorts of places on the moon. And then if you want to go home from the moon, the Earth is always in exactly the same position in the sky. You always have a direct return launch window open to you. And so that's the proper way to build a lunar base. So it's a very unfortunate thing. It's a diversionary concept. It's something where someone said, we've got an SLS and an Orion, and what do we do with it? We got to have something to do. We have somewhere to go. And Orion is not big enough to be the habitat for a Mars mission. It's way over-designed as a transport system to get people to the space station, although you could use it for that. But, you know, it's designed to go about lunar distances. But frankly, the right way to do a lunar base is, as I say, direct return, not the LOR. So, well, it would certainly be kind of a convenient vehicle for going to a space station in orbit around the moon, so let's put a space station in orbit around the moon. It's not mission-driven. It's not science-driven. The idea that you would put a space station in orbit around the moon in order to teleoperate rovers on the moon, eliminating the 1.5-second time delay of controlling them from Earth is preposterous. I mean, we're building self-driving cars right now that can drive all over the place in Los Angeles traffic. There's a lot less traffic on the moon. Or Mars, for that matter. I do not think that the idea of putting an orbital base in orbit around Mars is necessary to do human exploration of Mars, or particularly useful, although it's not as ridiculous in terms of the teleoperation thing. And the idea that you would put people in a space station in orbit around the moon because you can't get the medical data on solar flare exposure that in the space station in orbit around the Earth, and so you want to expose people to a kind of radiation which they're protected from in the low Earth orbit, falls into the category of unethical medical researcher. Okay, I mean, quite literally, to intentionally expose people to a toxic hazard for the purpose of evaluating the toxic hazard. It's one thing to take risks to actually go somewhere in space. It's another thing just to expose people to risks for the sake of it. It's like, you know, it's one thing to study wounds of soldiers that they get in battle. It's another thing to line soldiers up against the wall and inflict wounds on them for the purpose of studying wounds. So I don't see it happening. So what should we do? Okay, well, as people know, I do think that NASA needs definite goal. It can only function well if it has a definite goal. I think the goal should be humans to Mars. Now, and it should be in a relatively short time frame, in a time frame of a decade or so, because I do not believe that the political consensus that allows a program to be launched can be trusted to stay in place longer than that, and you risk having it fall apart, as, for instance, the Bush Moon Initiative did, precisely because it was put on a 16-year schedule. Program was announced in 2004, and with a land on the moon in 2020. Now, however, let me just say this. there's a group of people who are quite enthusiastic about making the moon the next major goal of the human spaceflight program. And I have some sympathy for this position because it is a real goal. And many of them advocate it precisely because it can be framed in a way that it could be done within a two-term presidential administration and therefore could be a real goal as opposed to a vision. All right, you know, Bush announcing the moon in the year 2020 was putting it outside of his own responsibility. Obama in 2016, October, calling for humans to Mars was a more grand version of such nonsense. You have to, if you say you're going to do something, you have to announce it in a time frame where you're going to be around to do it, as opposed to saying this is something that I hope somebody else will do sometime. Now, but that said, I think, see, as a Mars advocate, I do not believe we need to go to the moon in order to go to Mars. However, I do believe that if we were going to Mars, we would also want to go to the moon at the same time because, first of all, you can only launch to Mars every 2 years. So what are you doing with your entire launch infrastructure and many other things during the off year? And frankly, if you have a heavy lift booster system, and I don't care whether it's the SLS or the Falcon Heavy or Super Heavy or whatever, somebody is paying to support that infrastructure. And the overall support of that infrastructure is feeding into the cost of every launch. In other words, the total cost of the entire group of people that support that system has to be amortized over all the launches that are done, as well as the development costs for the system as well, of course. So you really want to have your launch rates up. Got to be up. You cannot run any kind of economical system, even if it's fully reusable. If you only launch a system once every 2 years, it's going to be completely uneconomic. The development cost is going to feed into every one of those launches. So the idea is, if we are supporting the development of a heavy lift system, which we need to do the moon and Mars with people, okay, and near-Earth asteroids as well, okay, we want to have a program that supports a high launch rate every year. So, okay, you say, fine, we're going to do the moon and Mars essentially in parallel. And whether the moon mission landing occurs 2 years before the first Mars landing, that's fine. That's not germane. Okay, I oppose the position that we have to go to the moon and spend 2 decades on it before we are ready to go to Mars. That is not true. Or that we can't go to Mars and therefore we must go to the moon. But but in the same sense as developing the Apollo hardware set enabled us to launch a space station in an afternoon, developing a Mars hardware set will enable us to do lunar missions at the same time and asteroid missions. And the thing is this, if you say, fine, we're going to do the moon, and we're going to do it with a hardware set which is a subset of the hardware set needed to do Mars. And that does 2 things. First of all, it allows you to do the moon with a very robust system. But also, it disciplines the Mars mission to being something where you lift a heavy payload and you throw, say, 50 tons on trans-Mars injection, and you do the Mars mission with 1, 2, 3, 4 launches of that character, whether the particular scheme is the Mars Direct scheme, or as I was discussing with Davin Newman today, okay, you know, NASA says we can't do Mars because we don't have a heavy lander that can land 10 or 20 tons on the surface of Mars, and that's why we're doing the Deep Space Gateway. Well, if your problem is that you don't have a 20-ton lander for Mars, the answer to that is not to build a Deep Space Gateway. The answer to that is to build a 20-ton lander for Mars. Okay? And we could create that. In other words, a heavy lift, for instance, you could do it kind of the way Musk described it in his Guadalajara thing, but scale it down. You say, okay, I got a Falcon Heavy, can lift 50 tons to low Earth orbit. If I can actually refuel that second stage in Earth orbit, then the same 50 tons I lifted in Earth orbit can now be sent on either translunar or trans-Mars injection. That's a Saturn V class capability. Okay. That capability would allow you to do Mars Direct. It would allow you to land 20 tons on Mars. And if you land 20 tons on Mars, you can land a HAB on Mars. You can land an ascent vehicle on Mars. You can put an Earth return HAB in Mars orbit, and then you could do the mission semi-direct, 3 launches, bang, okay? Send the HAB to the surface. Well, send an ascent vehicle to the surface, send a crew with a HAB to the surface, and an Earth return vehicle to Mars orbit, and explore on the surface, do 1 rendezvous on the way back, and trans-Earth injection, and you're there. The same system, if you can send 50 tons on trans-Mars injection, you can send the same 50 tons on trans-lunar injection, in fact, put it in lunar orbit, and then do lunar missions that way. This is the sort of program I would like to see. In other words, if you create this kind of transportation for the moon, and then you say, now we have this available, how can we do Mars missions using this? Right now, immediately you've disciplined the Mars mission out of being something that is done with giant futuristic Battlestar Galactica spaceships into how do you do a Mars mission with the lunar class transportation system, and there is a way to do it. So that's what I think our program should be. That's what I think NASA's way forward should be. But aside from that, there's a couple of other things NASA should do. I think it should aggressively pursue its program of space astronomy, more or less as outlined by its various committees. I think it's a terrific program. But and of course, it should continue its program of robotic planetary exploration, both to Mars and Europa and all this sort of thing. The one thing, though, I mean, look, why has the space astronomy and robotic planetary exploration programs been so productive, whereas the manned space program, with the exceptions of Apollo and the Hubble Space Telescope, has been unproductive, scandalously so, okay? It's because the astronomy program and the robotic exploration program are mission-driven, okay? They are spending money to do great things, okay? They are not doing things in order to spend a great deal of money, okay? This is the key distinction, okay? So if instead of thinking of where can we find an excuse to spend money on SLS and Orion, well, a convenient way to do it would be to build a space station in lunar orbit without any thought of the utility of such an activity. Okay, they would say our objective is to establish humans on the moon and Mars, and what's the most efficient way to do that? Then they could become equally productive as these other programs. I mean, the NASA, I mean, look, there's a lot of bad things you can say about NASA, but its space astronomy and robotic exploration programs have been epic in their success. They are literally the greatest human activities of the present age. Okay? The pictures that Hubble has brought back to the cosmos are the greatest art of the present age. It's not Jackson Pollock. Okay? It's the pillars of creation. And you know, this 500 years from now, people want to look at great 20th century art. That's what it's going to be. Okay? And you know, and they're emblematic of humanity's search for truth and commitment to the search for truth. They're tremendous, whereas the other is with exceptions noted, has been a scandal. So we need to, wherever we choose to go, that's how we need to choose to do it. We need to pick worthwhile objectives that are worthy of the cost and risk of human spaceflight, and commit to do them in the most efficient possible way. That's what I've got to say.
Okay.
What, you want to speak?
I thought the lady goes first.
All right, she does.
Okay, well, my name is Carol Stoker, and back when I was a graduate student, I organized a set of conferences. The first one was in 1981, and it was called Case for Mars. And some of the most interesting people, some of whom are in this room, came to Case for Mars.
Use the microphone.
Oh, is the microphone? Oh, sorry. So the most interesting people who came to Case for Mars made the following disclaimer, which I am going to make. I've been waiting since 1981 to have to make this disclaimer. While I do work for NASA, I am not here representing the opinion of NASA or official representative of NASA. I'm here on my own time and with my own resources, and so don't take anything I say as NASA's position. Make of that what you will. Space exploration kind of breaks down into two categories, and most of the people and most of the things that you think about fall in the getting there category. So all of the rocket science, all of the engineering falls in the getting there category. I'm a scientist by training and by interest, and scientists aren't really interested in how you get there. What we're interested in is being there. And so being there is actually what it's about. It's really not about getting there. So I think my personal opinion is what NASA should be doing is NASA should be buying the ride to get there from SpaceX, who's able to do it much more efficiently than almost anyone else in the solar system at the present time. And that NASA should be focusing on the being there aspect of things. So that means developing the infrastructure to live, and I actually find that as I get older, that even Bob now thinks that going to the moon is okay. And so do I, you know, and in 1981 I was adamantly against it. But now I like to see anything at all happen in my lifetime, and so going back to the moon looks a lot more tempting. But really, it's what you do there. It's the learning to live and work on another planet. And I think that in 1981, we were not that far from Apollo, that we actually had a lot of both the can-do spirit and the capability, you know, the hardware, to have gone, you know, probably by the mid-1970s easily to a lunar base and a permanent presence. And when I was a graduate student, I fully expected to go to Mars in my lifetime. The Wernher von Braun plan that he put in front of then Vice President Spiro Agnew, or actually it was...
it was Agnew, yes.
Yeah, was actually to land humans on Mars in 1984. And had we gone ahead with what we were doing at the time of Apollo, we would have easily made that milestone. So here we are in the next millennium, and we haven't really done anything. So I think going to a lunar base now with hardware that can be bought commercially and could probably be done for, you know, in my wild guess numbers, something like $1 billion a manned mission or less. And that's very affordable. And I think that's actually what we should be doing. And give us a chance to work out the operational issues and build a proper spacesuit, and, you know, a spacesuit that is light enough and mobile enough to let humans actually be useful on the surface of the moon and Mars. So then there's the issue of Mars. And again, this is coming from the position of a scientist. My opinion about direct to Mars, or what we need to do on Mars before we send humans, has also changed. And that is, to me, the thing that we have to do, the most important thing we should be doing, is to have a robotic precursor mission, or missions, to really get a better understanding of whether or not there's life on Mars today, modern life on Mars. Not if there was life on Mars 3.5 billion years ago. The reason we need to do that is because if there is life on Mars, we will inadvertently bring it back to Earth when we send humans. And we don't know what the consequences of that could be. And, you know, regardless of, I know Robert has certain opinions about that, you know, that it can't affect us, it can't give us a disease. It doesn't matter whether it can give us a disease. And it might be related to us. and I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow, and, you know, basically, Earth and Mars have exchanged material, and life on Earth may have come from Mars or vice versa. There's a lot of reasons to think that there has been interplanetary transport of material, but that doesn't save us from having life on Mars not be dangerous to us, because even if it did come from Earth, it has evolved separately. And alien invaders you know, are wrecking our ecosystems all over the planet routinely now. And if you were to disrupt the microbial biosphere, you could destroy the habitability of the planet very quickly, because the microbial biosphere on the Earth is well mixed. Virtually every piece of soil from anywhere on the planet can go to any extreme environment, and somebody in that piece of soil will, some microbe in that piece of soil or ecosystem from that piece of soil will be able to inhabit that extreme environment. So everything on Earth can live everywhere on Earth. But that is probably not true for Mars. That mixing is not happening often enough for Earth and Mars to be well mixed at the microbiology level. So from my point of view, the most important thing we should be doing, NASA should be doing, is searching for life on Mars in a very serious way for modern life on Mars, and that should be the priority prior to sending humans. And that's about all I have to say.
Okay. Greg.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very grateful to be here at this conference and celebrating 20 years of people wanting to go to Mars and working to go to Mars and having the vision to go to Mars. The opinions which I am about to express are not my own. I do not wish to be jumped in the alley. I do not wish to be jumped in the parking lot. However, my friend, Dr. Zubrin, has some ideas that need a little bit of correction. So with that, I will proceed on. He says that there should be no lunar station.
Lunar orbit station.
Right, not a base, but a lunar orbit station. And the direct space gateway or deep space gateway is much more than that. It is also envisioned by Lockheed Martin as being a craft capable of transport from the moon to Mars, to in essence be the carrier craft that takes it there. And that eliminates the argument about the Orion not being big enough, because if you can push a whole space station from the moon to Mars, then obviously you have enough room. So that's the first point. Second is, Bob decries having soldiers tested and exposing people to these horrible dangers. Historically, 50% of the spacecraft sent to Mars have been eaten by the great galactic ghoul. Okay, they don't survive. And giving people only a coin toss chance of survival to get there, and probably a coin toss chance of survival to get back, not really the way that we want to treat our fellow human beings. Not building a lunar base makes a great deal of sense. You don't want to set up an economy there. You don't want to set up any form of production there. You don't want to have anything that will compete with the profit centers that we have here on Earth. Those profit centers are very important to the continued operation of the space program. The whole idea that you can find ice at the lunar poles is completely false. It's based on an analysis of hydrogen emissions that are shown to be there at the poles. There's no demonstration of any oxygen with that hydrogen, much less there being water or water ice there. There are hydrates in the minerals in various places where there's volcanic activity on the moon. That's mineable. But of course, that wouldn't be able to be accessible by putting a base at one of the lunar poles, which, you know, you might get some hydrogen, maybe some helium-3, but you're not going to get water. That makes the whole idea of making propellant on the moon rather preposterous. If you don't have anything to start with, you can't break it, fraction it out into hydrogen and oxygen and use that. And you didn't bring any algae farms or anything else with you in order to make something more like what your rockets are based on: kerosene, Jet A fuel, RP1, whatever you want to call it. That's the propellant that you really need on the moon, and you're not going to make it out of just splitting water. The idea that Orion is not big enough when it is a 1/3 3D expansion of the Apollo capsule, which got us to the moon. And remember, the original Apollo capsule wasn't the only thing that went to the moon. We had a lunar lander, a LEM, and we had an entire variety of support equipment that went with that capsule. That capsule was just to be the bed and breakfast for 3 guys. Now, Orion would be the bed and breakfast for 7 guys, because we're not going to send any women there, okay? That's not the way that things work, okay? There's no science mission in just sending people to go die at Mars. And all the science that needs to be done at Mars is much more cost-effectively done by robots. We've known that for all the time that we have been going up to high-altitude orbit with the International Space Station, okay? That's as high as we need to go. The robots can go the rest of the way and do the science, okay? That brings us to the whole idea of teleoperation. Since from here to the moon is teleoperation distance, it's a good way to practice being able to do that at Mars. When we get there, we will need to be able to operate on the surface, and again, since NASA policy is that those poor little microbes own the planet, we cannot touch the surface of that planet until all the microbes have been taken care of for all posterity. The only way we can do that is with sterilized robots that go down to the surface, unless Bob is offering to be sterilized.
Well, you wanted to take care of the microbes. You could do that by nuking the surface.
Oh, that's an entire ethnocentric idea.
I don't want to take care of
Mars.
the microbes. That's not my policy.
then we have the whole idea of radiation exposure. If you look at Bob's history, he has repeatedly said that radiation exposure is a hoax, like global warming, okay? He says that if you take smokers and you take their cigarettes away from them and send them to Mars, they'll be better off, because all the radiation exposure they have won't hurt them as much as the cigarettes did. And again, this goes back to his argument about hurting scientists or hurting soldiers by testing on them. He would test on these people to see if they can expose themselves to galactic
We're
radiation.
not testing them.
Because
No. They are enduring a hazard to do a mission. Okay.
Right, but you have no idea.
It is ethical to expose soldiers to risk to accomplish a necessary mission. That is different than shooting soldiers in order to study wound pathology.
Right, but do you know what the actual amount of galactic radiation and other forms of radiation and solar flares are at a specific time in the future between Earth and Mars? You don't.
Well,
You're exposing them to a completely unknown environment and level of radiation damage.
Well, no, that's absolutely false. We have studied cosmic radiation. The Marie instrument on the Mars Odyssey spacecraft measured it. The Curiosity measured it. Actually, the cosmic ray dose in low Earth orbit is half of that in interplanetary space because the Earth's magnetic field does not shield out billion-volt particles. The Earth blocks out half the sky. That's it. And we have had now over a dozen astronauts and cosmonauts who have taken cumulative cosmic ray doses on the International Space Station or the Mir that are comparable to what they would have gotten going to Mars and back, and we have seen no radiological casualties whatsoever. Now, the lunar orbiting space station would expose them to even more radiation, but without actually going to Mars. So the issue is that you are proposing to expose astronauts to the same hazard that you say they should not be exposed to, but not letting them accomplish the mission. You're sending pilots to fly through flak, but without going over the enemy target. You're just flying them over our own airbase and shooting up at them to have them endure flak. That is what you are proposing. Okay, that is why what you are proposing is an unethical form of medical research as opposed to allowing people to take great risks to do great things.
Now that I clearly have gotten Bob's goat, I'm going to go back for his horse and his cow. I will also note that during his presentation and Carol's presentation, I did not interrupt them.
But I was not saying any falsehoods about you.
I'm not saying any falsehoods about you.
Yes, of course you are. Anyway, continue to make your points.
You're a friend of mine. I would not say that you're a bad person in any way, shape, or form. I was demolishing your argument, which is a different thing. There are specific, definite goals in a time frame. Boeing has published these. It's called Boeing's Path to Mars. It's not America's path to Mars. It's not Bob Zubrin's path to Mars. That's a 20-year-old plan that he's been unable to get adopted in that time frame. Okay? Arguing with David Newman today about getting it adopted now only means that 20 years from now, at the 40th Mars Society Conference, we will be back here in the same position, because it is not up to him or Deva what is done. It is up to the Congress people. And the Congress people are owned by the launch complex industry, which is funded by the military security complex, a much bigger payer of paychecks than Bob.
You're going to have to wrap up in a minute and let Rick speak.
Okay.
Oh, it's okay.
There's a lot of infrastructure that's already been built. Heavy launchers are indeed required. That $1.5 billion that's being paid for SLS is very profitable. He talks about going to Mars and then the moon, which means rather than solving the problems that we need to solve in terms of how do we operate in space, how do we live continuously in space, which we've never attempted anywhere, much to, you know, the idea of risking people. Going to Mars is throwing people into the deep end of the pool and hoping they can swim. The heavy Mars lander is an interesting process, but we don't really have a heavy moon lander at this point. We don't really have any way of operating off-world at this point.
We've already demonstrated a heavy moon lander, as you may have heard.
I don't think the LEM was a heavy lunar lander.
It was a heavy enough lander to land manned missions on the moon,
actually. One guy
as well as
above.
ascent vehicles.
As far as it being mission-driven, the question is what the mission is. If the mission is to satisfy Bob's idea of what should be done, then by all means, let's make that the mission. But that isn't the mission that Congress has. The mission that Congress has is to solve what Boeing and Lockheed want to do.
No, that's not true. Okay, the mission that we have as a species is to become a spacefaring species, to establish human beings on 2 new worlds.
That's
okay?
not Congress's goal.
Well, no, excuse me. Okay, that is the mission. Okay, the mission is not to give money to Boeing and Lockheed. Okay,
that's Congress's mission.
No, that's not the mission. Okay, And that's not Congress. Congress's mission is to serve the nation, not certain preferred contractors.
Then why have we been going to high-altitude orbit since 1972 instead of going to Mars?
Because of a failure of vision by our political leadership.
Which is not agreeing with Bob Zubrin.
No, excuse me. Okay, you're saying, what should we be doing in space? Okay, what I'm saying, okay, is what we should be doing in space is establishing humanity on new worlds. Mm-hmm. You're saying what we should be doing in space is giving money to Boeing and Lockheed. Now, that apparently is the distinction in our argument. And the issues are not whether it agrees with me or you. The issues is whether it agrees with establishing humanity on two new worlds or giving money to Boeing and Lockheed. Those are the two positions at issue, not two different personalities that, oh, doing that would be pleasing Robert Zubrin.
Having
Okay?
full
Doing
title
that
to
would
the
be
goat
accomplishing
and
humanity
the
on
horse,
two new worlds.
I'm now going to complete the cow. Since there really is no doubt that there's a separate evolution on here in Mars, we have to put those robotic precursors to work on Mars to be able to find out that if deep in the northern ocean there's ice that has proof of microbial life, if any of that is true, then we have to preserve that life because it is the greatest thing. Life on another planet, life on another world is the greatest discovery that mankind will make. And government has to buy that from business because government can't do anything by itself. And being there is not the solution until you have worked out how to get there in the first place. We've had the technology since the 1970s. Bob's wonderful, masterful plan has demonstrated that. We do not have the will. And until there is the will to go to Mars, we will not be there. 20 years from now, or 40 years from now, or 60 years from now. We have to choose, all of us together, and we have to convince our political leaders to do that as well. Until they do, the profit preservation program for Boeing and Lockheed will continue.
Okay, Rick.
Is that 5 minutes for the entire session? Are you serious?
I got 10. I was hoping for questions.
For the entire session?
Yeah, you're wasting your time. Speak.
I'm wasting my time. Thank you. Thank you. I've heard as much air spinning around this room as Irma approaching Florida. First of all, I do want to say something. Jerry Purnell was one of the generals that led part of the revolution that got us to the point where we are now, and partially is responsible. At the time, I'm looking around this room, and there's a whole nother point to be made about how few people under 35 there are. But those of you who aren't will know that it was Purnell, Graham, Larry Niven, not Larry Niven, Stein, Harry Stein, and a few others who started the DCX program, which was demonstrating single-stage orbit technologies years before this stuff was cool. And they brought that program in just when most of us were giving up hope that we were losing against the establishment. And there are so many Jerry Purnell stories, we'll save most of them, but everything I say, I'm saying on behalf of my company, which is not SpaceX. I just left my hat at home. I stole that from Elon. Anyway, this is an interesting discussion, to say the least, and it's an important discussion that we have to have. The concept of what should NASA be doing in space, some of us have spent our lives dealing with it and trying to figure that out and trying to make sure we were doing the right thing. NASA is a government agency. Government agencies ostensibly work for the people. Actually, they work for the people that have the most money, the most power, and the most influence in terms of helping the people that are making those decisions get reelected. We know that. Now, I made a pledge to Bill Gerstenmaier a few years ago that I would not attack the SLS. By the way, I'm one of the guys that made up the term Senate Launch System. And you can read my stuff from back then. I think I called a former NASA administrator a screaming girl in a zombie movie, or something like that, Mr. Griffin. Anyway, in print. But I think that what I will say is that, yes, we have been caught in a place for a long time without vision. We had a vision. Kennedy had a vision. His vision was to beat the Soviets to the moon and take the most expensive selfie ever shot, because the entire Apollo program was based on one photograph. That was it. That was the climax of the program. All the wonderful people, all the great people that put so much work into that program, all the heroes, my friend Buzz, the other guys that did all this, they did it for one photograph, to show that the American system was better than the Soviet system. Game over, done. Apollo was not a failure. It was a magnificent success, an incredible success. And it was a success because there was a clear vision, there was a clear and understandable goal, and there was an achievement that could be made, and people were marshaled towards that goal. And it wasn't based on politics, it was based on what would work to achieve the goal in the period that was declared. And we did it. And that was the lesson. And there were a lot of spin-offs that came out of Apollo. We are the most important. We, the kids sitting in front of the TV, watching Apollo. The kids watching Star Trek and Apollo, going, I want to do that. And maybe I'll stay in school and I'll let people beat me up and I'll become a coder and then I'll own them later. That's who it was, right? That was the spin-off, and that was us. But what happened after we achieved that goal was the vision went away. There was nothing to replace it. What had happened was, because Kennedy established a space program, or Johnson, that was spread around the country so it couldn't be killed, was we ended up with a space program that was spread around the country and couldn't be killed. And that program was hungry, and it needed jobs. And those contractors were hungry, and they needed money. And the politicians were hungry, so the contractors, and the cycle started. And that's where we've gotten to. Because without that lack of vision, without that clear clarion goal, without that clear understanding of what it is we were for and what we were about and how we were going to do it, or sorry, not how we were going to do it, but the way in which we were going to do it, and let people figure out how we were going to do it, because this is not about a mission. I don't give a crap what missions we do. I don't give a crap what hardware. I don't care if it's gay communist fairies swinging around and chanting Trump tribble songs about his wig, and they're going to go to take us to Mars. I don't care who it is. I don't care what group it is. I don't care anything about it. What I care is that we succeed, but we will only succeed if we define what the goal is. And we do not have a goal. We don't know why we're doing this. We, the culture, the people in this room, some of you do. Many of you do. The goal of the human spaceflight program is settlement, period. Period. At the end of the day. You can make arguments if you're talking about exploration, whether you can send robots or people. That's a completely different discussion. The end of the human spaceflight program, the investment that the people of the United States are making right now, they have decided to give us, the space geeks, $14 to $18 billion a year to play with. That's a leftover, by the way, because of the end of the Apollo program. It's just kept going. But that money's there. And we're running around going, please, please, NASA, would you maybe kind of give us a little bit of this and kind of move over? No, no, no. We have to take control of that. We who have the vision have to educate the people who communicate vision, who will receive vision, and who can act on vision, and tell them that we want to settle space. And we have to explain why that is important. And we have to explain why that's the critical path for us. And then we have to go make it happen. Everything else falls into place. Everything after that will fall into place. Because if you know you have a goal, settlement, or in the 60s, putting a human being on the moon, then you can gauge everything against that. Then you don't throw things away. Then you don't build massive vehicles that you can never economize, that you can never turn into an industrial infrastructure. What you do is you spend your time creating an economy, creating competitive systems, creating the ways that people can compete with each other so that costs are driven down in a market. That's what you have to do. And if you know you're trying to create an economy, I love the fact, by the way, that when the Europeans talk about the moon, they don't talk about a base, they talk about a village. I love that. Because that's not a government thing. That's a group of people doing a bunch of stuff together to happen to live together and trade together. And that's what's exciting, and that's what we have to do. We have to sell our vision, and then let it be worked out along the way. One of the things I would love to see is NASA mandated, and all the government agencies that deal with space mandated, that as a part of all considerations before they spend money, they have to look at how that best enables the development of the private sector in competitive ways. One of the battles we had when we killed the shuttle, and yes, we killed the shuttle. We took it down. It had to be taken down. You can go look. We did press releases called Scuttle the Shuttle. They're out there. We did it so that we could clear the way. And we were not looking for a one-to-one replacement for the shuttle. We were looking to create a competitive market. I don't want to give, I love Elon, but I don't want to give him the job. I want him to freaking compete for it. And I want him to compete hard. And I want somebody to come along and kick his ass. And then he's going to have to kick theirs. And then the price drops, and then we get to go. That's what it's all about. The expansion of human civilization and the life of this planet into space. And once we know that, and we all agree on it, then it doesn't matter. The other issues fall out of that. It's called common sense. It's called enterprise. It's called creativity. And once we allow that to occur, then it'll all happen. So for me, it's not what vehicles we use, because Bob's got a brilliant idea. You were a pioneer. One of the reasons we gave you $100,000 to start a thing called the Mars Society. But we believe in the same things. We just all have different approaches. Some people want to go to the moon. Great. Some people wanted to live in New Hampshire. Some want to live in Utah. Some want to live in Florida. That doesn't mean the other states suck. We're all going to the new world. But what we should do is make sure we do it in a way that supports. I love your idea of the interaction between, the fact that you're actually using the other M word just blows me away, man. Moon. I love that. And you're right. Having a modular system that we can use in different places in different ways, that is mutually supportive, parts are replaceable, standards are created, things like that. Exactly right. And I want to make out one last point, too. A lot of people think that I'm anti-government. I have an asteroid mining company. I also did a book called Return to the Moon, and we gave the Mars. So it's like, don't fence me in, man. But we need the government. And I want to end with 3 quick statements. I call them the keys to the frontier. There are 3 keys to the frontier. The ability to get to and from the frontier cheaply, reliably, and often. Number 1. Number 2, the right to use the resources of the frontier in any way you need, in any fashion you can, to do whatever you want. And number 3, a government that supports you or stays the hell out of the way while you're doing it. That's it. Those are the keys. That's what we need. I'm done.
All right. So, the moon, Mars, and mission driven. All right. And it takes a village.
It takes. Oh, great, Hillary.
Okay. All right. Now, I just want to know if Tom Markusik is here.
Right there.
Oh, he is. Okay. Thank you. Finally. From showing up. Okay. Hiding behind this thing. Okay. So I guess that concludes this panel. Thank you very much.